We're already recording
That's a weird setting. I'll stop that now.
before we officially get going. Okay.
We're going.
So number one on our agenda is agenda and materials review. I think the one thing that we talked about changing was moving up the number 6 or number 5 to maybe next. So Lindsay can give the ad hoc committee report if she decides that it's time to leave.
All right, do you want to move, so 5 to 2 before public comment? Is that correct?
Do we need to have like a motion for that or movement?
Yep. Bernadette is moving, I think. Lindsay is.
I'll second.
Taking great notes here, guys. Okay. So we will move the item 5 to number 2 and scooch everything else down, correct?
You have to vote on it.
Hey, we got to vote on it. Any discussion first? Sorry, I'm losing it.
Well, are there any other changes also that we should?
I don't think so.
So then let's vote on moving number 5 to number 2 and moving everything down. All in favor, say aye or give me a thumbs up. Any opposed? I don't think so. I mean, I should have. This is fun. This is really fun, guys.
You're doing great.
All right, now public comment. Leah, do you want to do the spiel for that?
No,
to explain how that
moved
works?
that down to 3.
Oh yeah, you're right. Thanks, Vice Chair. Lindsay.
I can give you a brief ad hoc update. So where we are now, actually, Kevin Altucker did a nice summary at the City Council work session yesterday that's available for people to watch if you would like the details of the timeline. Essentially, the group decided to do a prioritization exercise and try to schedule out work for the subcommittee or for the ad hoc committee, and to establish subcommittees to try to execute that work. So kind of multiple things happened in terms of reorganizing the shape and timeline of the work. The first subcommittee was about civilian oversight. It met last week. Rick participated in that. I did not. There were limitations to how many people could be in each subcommittee. I think it was 7 members. And so the subcommittee met and put together some motions that they're forwarding to the whole ad hoc committee tonight to look at in terms of civilian oversight. There are 3 other subcommittees looking at de-escalation, body-worn video, and one other thing that I'm forgetting. I'll look it up while we're going here. But essentially, when the staff charts that out, it looks like between now and December, those are the 4 things of the 10 kind of prioritized items that the ad hoc committee looked at that could theoretically be done in the timeline that council had initially proposed. So the subcommittee for the police oversight will meet back with the whole body of the ad hoc committee tonight to propose some motions and have some further discussion. Rick provided some testimony in written form that would be happy to forward to you all if you'd like to see it. I've done the same. There are a lot of challenges to having enough time and kind of dealing with the mechanics of such a large table of people. And so the conversation has been a little scattered, hence sort of my inclination to provide some kind of like written synthesized testimony that's more than 2 or 3 minutes in length. And I will rely on staff. I don't know if Mark or Leah watched the end of the city council meeting, work session meeting. I only watched like the first half, Kevin's presentation. Did they take any action to amend either the timeline or the format?
Yes, they approved all staff recommendations. I don't remember the exact votes, but they approved extending the timeline to the end of March. They approved compensation, and they approved whatever that third one was. Mark?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It wasn't unanimous, I think.
It wasn't.
The first one, it was 7-2. I'm sorry, 6-2 with Mike Clark, Councilor Clark, and Councilor Taylor voting no. And then Counselor Taylor voted no on the second and the third ones. But again, primarily it was about extending the timeframes and the compensation issue. The third one was instead of paying people one lump sum at the end, that there would be maybe it was 3 separate payments. I'm not sure of an exact number, but it was the payments would be, in what's the right word? Payments and payments.
Incremental payments rather than one lump
Yes,
sum.
thank you.
So that's, I think, good news given the complexity of the work and the snail's pace that such a large table conversation can go. Extending the timeline to April actually makes it feasible to kind of cover more of the topics. Oh, Mark, I see your hand.
I did not see yours come through if you submitted written comments. I saw Rick's come through, but I did not see yours come through.
Mine came through at the end of like the 50-page packet for the previous meeting. So I'd be happy to just send it by itself because much of the other packet material may not be pertinent. But essentially what I did is I picked, just so that you know, like I picked 3 what I thought were sort of exemplary cases just to provide some context, and also included for people the minutes to those meetings so that they could see sort of what the police oversight that the CRB is currently doing looks like in context, and highlighted some areas of concern related to those cases, and then also some area of concern just like based on overall CRB participation, and then linked them to some specific items within Campaign Zero. So those were sort of the things that I put out there to discuss. And Rick's testimony is more specific to the subcommittee meeting that happened last week, and the specific motions that were put forward there, particularly the issue of subpoena power, spoliation, which is a word I'd never heard before, super fun, and what Rick is referring to as the omnibus motion about discipline, most specifically the discussion of a disciplinary matrix. So anyway, I'm sort of rambling, but the work proceeds. I'm glad that council has extended the timeline. I think that will make space for more substantial conversations and people not feeling rushed, and making space for everybody to be heard. I think there are a lot of really dedicated and smart people who are sitting at the table who have a lot to offer. So I look forward to hearing from more of them and moving through the material methodically.
Thank you. Do you want to put in the minutes or in the chat a link to watching, was it Kevin? Is that what you said? Kevin's presentation?
Yeah,
yesterday?
Kevin Alltucker's presentation at the council work session. It was the second agenda item, so you don't have to watch the whole thing. You can click through just to that agenda item if you're interested.
Thank you. All right. Is that all for the ad hoc?
I think
Okay.
so, and unless anybody has any particular questions, that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could give us a sense of the 3 cases that you linked to, not necessarily the specific cases, but
Sure.
What were the issues they
highlighted? I'd be happy to. So the first one was an officer involved shooting with a military veteran with PTSD. The second one was what I would call an escalation situation with a mother who had called cahoots for her mentally ill son, but police responded instead because cahoots was not available. And the third case is a recent one that's not a case that we reviewed, but concerns about the timeline for submitting complaints through the auditor's process with a mother who lost her son and was concerned about the way that he was an infant. She was concerned about the way that his death was investigated. So those were the 3 that were in there. And when you look at it, you'll see the minutes for those meetings are linked, so you can kind of read through the discussion and what happened. Of course, you could access the whole files if you wanted to see all the details, which in fact might be helpful.
Any other questions on the ad hoc? Okay, now I think it's time for public comment. Leah,
Sorry, I was looking for the webcast. Yes, it is time for public comment. So we do have some people in attendance, so I want to let you know right now, if you want to participate in public comment, go ahead and raise your hand. You can do that a couple different ways, but typically you click on participants or you click in the chat. If you're having trouble raising your hand, you can write in the chat, but I'll talk for a few more minutes and give you all time to figure that out. So we have 3 minutes for public comment. CRB bargain for protocols require that we don't talk about the case that's being discussed that evening at the meeting where it's being discussed. If you are here to talk about one of the cases under review, you can definitely come back at our next meeting and do that. If you have public comment and you somehow aren't able to technologically get to that point where you can offer public comment, feel free to email us at policeauditor@eugene-or.gov and we will make sure that that gets in our record. What's the other thing? I will do a wave when you have 20 seconds left. I will have you on a timer and then I will let you know when it's been 3 minutes. I'm not seeing anyone raising their hands. Except for Mark. Just kidding. Sorry. Yeah, I'm still not seeing anyone raise hands. So I'm really hoping that we're not missing anyone. If you need more time or if you figure out later how to raise your hand and you want to give a public comment, we can work on fitting you in. We do want to make sure that anyone who wants to speak can be heard. But not seeing anyone participating at this time. Let me check one more time. I think we can, oh, and we have one. Emily Carroll, I'm going to allow you to talk and give you 3 minutes. Emily, you're on mute.
There we go. Is there any way you can clarify for me what it is that we're allowed to comment on? I think I missed a piece of this meeting, if you don't mind clarifying.
Sure, you can comment on anything that's important to you. The only limitation is that we ask that people don't discuss the case that's under review tonight. So if you have a personal connection to the case that's under review or you happen to know more details or you were there, then we would appreciate it if you didn't offer that in a public comment tonight. But if you have anything else under the sun that you want to talk about, you're welcome to.
Okay, I'm going to decline from comment at the moment. I just wanted a clarification. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And you're welcome to come back next month and offer it up again.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, and I see we have Lena. So Lena, I will allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, hi, I'm Lena Houston Davison, and this is just a kind of a housekeeping curiosity. I noticed that this meeting is at 5:30 and the ad hoc meeting is at 6. And I didn't know if that was just a coincidence. Is that typically how that is? I mean, if it would have been valuable for people in the ad hoc committee to be able to view and watch this particular meeting. So I was just curious about that, if that's going to be a regular thing. I'm not sure how many meetings the ad hoc committee has left or how they're scheduled. Just a curiosity, if you can provide any insight to that.
I would say typically we don't always have a lot of time for responding to public comment, but I can respond to that one very easily.
I forgot that public comment doesn't get response. So.
No, it does sometimes. It kind of depends on the agenda actually, but just quickly, I can say that our meetings are always on the second Tuesday of the month. We discussed with the staff for the ad hoc committee what our schedule was, and they still had the ad hoc committee scheduled for tonight. I do think it's unfortunate. I think that people who want to see what community oversight looks like and see what our meetings look like are not going to be able to view both. I do believe that both meetings are being recorded. So if you want to watch one after the fact, but actually attend the other, you're welcome to do that. But it's unfortunate. I agree.
Thank you.
All right. I am not seeing any other hands.
Yeah, in the
Okay.
comments, there was a
Okay.
public comment.
I will respond to that in a moment. Yes. Thank you. Okay, hold on. Something just shifted in the other screen, so I have to make sure I don't have another raised hand. Okay, I don't see any other raised hands, so I think we can close public comment. I will respond in the chat to that chat.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the public for being here and commenting. I always appreciate that when the public is here. The next thing on our agenda is minutes approval. So this is for September and October. We didn't have the September minutes at our October meeting because of the quick turnaround between the two meetings. So we have both of those for today. Are there any changes or adjustments that we need to make, Bernadette?
Yeah, on the minutes for October 13th, page 4, the paragraph about where I'm talking. It says that is no necessary to say male. I think it's probably supposed to be they thought it was not necessary to say male. And I think I had another one. Oh, and on the next page, page 5, I think it's probably more appropriate to actually spell out the word bitch instead of just use asterisks, since that is the word that was used and we want the minutes to actually be clear as to what was said. So otherwise, I think they're fine.
Any others?
There was another
I had-
typo somewhere, but I lost it.
Okay, well, I have a typo. Maybe this is the one, Michael. On page 6, also of the October 13th, the top paragraph where it was me talking, it says from the time the officer entered the room and same the other two were hands on when the taser was deployed. That just doesn't make sense to me. I think it probably should read from the time the officer entered the room. I don't even know what, I mean, it's talking about how the taser was deployed 8 seconds after the officers entered the room. So maybe just change it to reflect that. Anything else? All right, do we vote to approve minutes or do we just approve them? All right, do we have to have a motion? Okay, does anybody move to approve the minutes with the adjustments?
I'm so
Bernadette?
moved.
Second. We have a couple seconds and vote. Everyone in favor of approving the minutes? And opposed? I will say that Jose is abstaining, perhaps.
Nope.
Oh, Jose, did you have anything to add or take away from the minutes?
No.
Okay, we voted
Sorry, there
to
was a
approve them.
choking baby. Sorry.
Oh gosh, no longer choking, I assume?
No longer choking, but that's why I had to leave. So nothing to add.
Understandable. We did vote to approve them. Do you agree with that vote? Okay. Glad the baby's okay. All right, comments from board members and commission liaisons. So we'll just go around my screen because that's easier for me. Bernadette, do you have any comments for tonight or?
I was going to ask, I didn't hear, is Rick not here because he's going to be at the ad hoc? So yeah, I mean, I think that's disappointing to have 2 of our members not be able to participate tonight especially since this, I mean, in both cases that we're going to talk about are important, but I think understanding the process and how things happen in the second case study, I think it's good to have all the people of the board here to be able to talk about the spectrum of how cases come through. So I'm disappointed by that. But I understand there's 37 people that you have to work around, and I'm sure Lindsay and Rick are not taking it personally, and I will try to not take it personally for them. So that's all.
I'll add that I do have comments that Rick emailed me, so we do have his input tonight, even though he won't be part of the discussion. All right, Bill, do you have any comments tonight?
No, I have nothing. I just want to apologize for missing last month's meeting. Sorry about that.
We forgive you. I do anyway. Okay. Michael, do you have any comments?
Yeah. So first off, I'm not going to apologize for missing last time because I had a migraine and I was like in bed like the entire day with the lights off because it was so awful. I want to acknowledge that we have some members of the public today who look like they're connected with the case, and I want to express my appreciation for them coming, and I always think that that's important, just as an opportunity to see how the process ends up.
Michael, Lindsay. Oh, Mike, do we have a Human Rights Commission liaison, or are they having meetings?
I think that's still me, but the things have just been crazy schedule-wise, and so I have not been to a Human Rights Commission meeting in like a couple months. I'm not sure why.
Okay.
I feel like there was a legitimate conflict, and then I missed one.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I think you're still the Police Commission liaison, correct?
Yep. So I agree. I'm really glad that there's public here and that there's people who are following, a case all the way through the process and getting to see how this conversation happens. I will say I personally apologize for you not being able to speak about your experiences with that case at this meeting. That is one of the things that I've recommended to the ad hoc committee in terms of changes that I would like to see to this process. I don't think that you should be prevented from discussing the cases that we discuss. That is not a universal position, but it's my position. And so I apologize if it feels, if it doesn't feel good or respectful that we have to sort of muzzle you in that way. And it would not be my choice, and it would irritate me if I were in your shoes. So thank you for showing up anyway. And thank you for listening to the process. And I look forward to your comments. If you can come and bring them to future meetings, I would love to hear them. In terms of the Police Commission, the thing that's most recently in my mind was that there was an emergency meeting that the chair and vice chair called right before the election to look at the protests policy, the police policy related to protests. There weren't any specific changes or recommendations that came out of that meeting, but there was a robust discussion about sort of different people's philosophies on how law enforcement should approach protests. We did not discuss civil disturbances or riots, so it was really limited to just one of the sort of three policies that might be pertinent in the case of different types of protest or civil unrest, not to conflate the two things. They should not be conflated. And so there was discussion, and yeah, that was pretty much that was the last meeting that I recall that happened right before the election. I think the thought was that it would be a good time to have a conversation given sort of the tensions in the run up to the election. And I'm trying to remember if there are any other. Oh, I also requested that the Police Commission, as they move forward in their work plan, to look at civil disturbances and sort of things that are classified no longer as protests, that as we look at those policies, that I requested that they wait until after we've had a chance to review the community impact case, just because I think it's really difficult for me to provide useful context or testimony about policies when it's been so long. Like, I don't know that I've ever reviewed any other cases that are related to those policies other than the ones that we sort of have in the pipeline from the incidents in May and June of this year. So I've requested that they delay the discussion of those policies until after the community impact case, just that seems sort of to make sense in terms of efficiencies. Oh, the pepperball policy, that was the other one that some modifications were made to the pepperball policy. I think there will be continued conversation about that. I think there are police commissioners who had continued questions about the uses of pepperball, the pepperball, which is a less lethal, like it's like a paintball that's filled with mace, basically, that they can use in crowd control situations and other situations where they want to use less than lethal force. I think that there are police commissioners who have ongoing concerns with some of the aspects of that policy, but in an effort to have a clear policy nailed down before the election, we made a vote to approve the pepperball policy as it had been amended. So it may be brought up again or it may not, but that is a new policy if you, or an recently amended policy if you're interested in looking at that. And that's it.
May I comment very briefly, because I have to go to the ad hoc committee meeting on the cases. The search and seizure case, that's one that Lee and I looked at, and I asked Leah to look at legally. So that was the one we opened that. I'm almost positive, instead of it being a citizen complaint, I'm not 100% positive. And I want to make it clear on the second one that I found the tactical approach on the de-escalation to be a very poor decision. Having said that, the rest you can discuss the cases, but because I wrote the adjudication, and I wanted to make it clear that we have to write adjudications based on whether we think there's policy violations as opposed to really poor decisions, and I stand by that. I thought that there were better ways to deal with this situation, and I made those same sort of comments in the bad case, and sometimes apparently it just doesn't resonate. But I just wanted to let you know that my feelings about that, and now I have to go to the ad hoc committee meeting, and I'd rather stay here, but I have to go to the other one. So thank you for all the hard work that all of you do.
And Lindsay, you're still staying for a little bit? Is that still your plan? Okay. Jose, do you have any comments?
No comment.
I also don't have any comments for tonight. So we can move on to the case review of case number 1, allegation of failure to de-escalate during call for service. Leah, I turn it over to you again.
Hi. Okay, so as Mark sort of mentioned, this was his case. So typically, as you all know, he would be the one, he would be the point person on this. But given the double booking tonight, this is how we're handling it. But I have reviewed the file. I feel okay about it. If you ask me a question and me and Kyle can't answer it, then we'll just write it down and have Mark answer you next month. But I do apologize. I know that's how we run things. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so I can do the little PowerPoint, because I did remember. Here we go. Well, of course, we're starting at the end there. Okay, can you all see that? Give me a thumbs up. Excellent, thank you. Have to check. There were issues at council last night. So Supervisor A responded to a scene where the reporting party had called for cahoots assistance when their adult child in the midst of a schizophrenic episode was holding a knife and telling the other parent to leave the home. I want to be clear for our public, our members of the public who are watching this. We try to not, we are not allowed to identify the involved officers, but we also try to not use identifying pronouns for anyone in the case, just to preserve anonymity to the extent that we can. So anyway, just so you know, the reporting party requested a cahoots response, was informed by dispatch that due to the weapon, the knife, the police would be sent. Cahoots did end up responding as well, and they stood by. Multiple officers responded to the scene, including Supervisor B and later Supervisor A. Supervisor B established probable, not probably, cause for menacing under the Family Abuse Prevention Act. So I included the statute language there just because it was interesting to me back when I learned about the mandatory arrest rule for family abuse prevention cases. So I included that there for your review. Supervisor B requested that the crisis negotiation team respond to the scene to help with establishing communications with this. I'm calling him the suspect, but yeah. CNT and the officers established on and off communication with that suspect. They obtained consent from the parents to enter the home if necessary. About an hour into the call and about 30 minutes into verbal hailing, Supervisor B made a plan to toss a phone inside to assist with speaking with the suspect. A group of officers, including Supervisor B and Supervisor A, approached the house to toss in the phone. Supervisor A then figured from the location of the suspect's voice that they were in the front room and began speaking with the suspect as the group of officers went into the home. They approached the suspect who was laying on the couch with a blanket. The person removed the blanket and stated they wanted to put their shoes on. When they sort of sat up and leaned forward, officers physically engaged and there was a struggle. Officers used control holds and they got the suspect on the ground. The physical struggle continued. They used focus blows and a taser, but they did not appear to affect the other person. Officers got handcuffs on and said that the person was continuing to kick and struggle. So then they applied what's called a flexible restraint device to restrain their legs as well. Supervisor A called for medics. Medics cleared the suspect for transport to the jail because the whole mandatory arrest situation. So following the incident, the reporting party called dispatch to register their anger about EPD's response. And they're upset. And then the reporting party filed a complaint with our office. And then in the intake interview with our office and a later interview with Internal Affairs, the reporting party stated largely the same concerns. The EPD had responded instead of cahoots, that the force that was used, and that their adult child was taken to the jail instead of the hospital. So the allegations were that Supervisor A, as the lead supervisor on scene, failed to make reasonable efforts to de-escalate the confrontation to prevent the need to use force. The adjudication recommendations were in agreement between the chain of command and our office that it was actually within policy, and the chief agreed. And these are the issues for discussion. I included a lot of policies there just because there was a lot of stuff used or potentially going to be used there. So. And I will now stop sharing my screen though, so you can see each other.
All right. So just for the public to understand how we discuss this, so usually we go through 3 different categories when we go through it. Things about the complaint and investigation, and then policies and practices and training, and then adjudication. So we'll go through that in an organized way. And we've talked in the past about having some time at the beginning to just kind of have general conversation. Do we want to do that tonight, or do we want to kind of do the more organized thing? Should we try the more conversational discussion about the case, and then we can hit the other 3 things if needed? Okay. Do you want me to call on people in turn, or? Okay, Bernadette, go ahead.
I was just going to kind of ask before we got started, because I'm pretty sure I understand how cahoots got started and how they're funded and what their policies are with regards to what they can and can't do. I think it might be helpful to just make sure that we all understand, what cahoots is about. and what restrictions there might be with regards to that. And then also the APA, the mandatory arrest. I don't know if anybody can give the background on that, but maybe that's not necessary. Maybe just knowing it's a mandatory arrest. But if perhaps Kyle or Jason can talk about the cahoots background, that would be helpful.
Let's see, I was gonna jump in, but oh good, Kyle's here. Kyle, come back. You're muted. Go, you're good.
All right. I can touch on both of those, Bernadette. The Abuse Prevention Act is primarily focused on domestic violence. That's where it's applied primarily. It applies to adult persons related by blood or marriage who are cohabitating or have cohabitated recently. And it's essentially comes from the days when too often we had domestic violence victims who were unwilling to press charges, and cycles of domestic violence continued. Domestic usually being between partners, but also just between adult family members. And so that's where that came from. So there are a few specific laws that take away our ability to decide on whether or not to make an arrest. And those are menacing, APA, menacing, all levels of assault, strangulation. And so that's how that came about. That is what the purpose of it is. And if we come to a scene and we determine that have probable cause for any of those things, then it is mandatory. We don't have the option, even if we don't like it or we don't want to. It would be, we're just not allowed to make that decision. So that's how the APA thing and kind of where that comes from. Concerning cahoots, I don't know a whole lot about the early days of it, but I do know that when I started 16 years ago, we had one shift of cahoots, and they were only available on very restricted hours. And it has slowly became over my career readily apparent how beneficial and useful they are in dealing with a lot of low level and all kinds of calls dealing with mental health and people and medical, low level medical even. And so the police department are the ones that pay a significant portion of the cahoots program. And over the last 15 years, I have seen as we slowly squeak out more and more money in order to try to add more and more hours and shifts for them. And it's spectacular now that we have oftentimes 24-hour coverage for cahoots. I just saw recently that they're doing some reorg and they've restricted a little bit, and it's unfortunate, but I'm hoping that they'll be back up and running at full steam here soon. So they do go to all kinds of calls, but they are civilians untrained in dealing with physical threats. It's essentially a medic and a mental health care worker in a van together. And so while there is a lot of stuff that they are allowed to and encouraged to, and calls that stack up on our call screen for them to follow up on, unfortunately, there's just a lot of stuff that they really are just not equipped to handle. And even our community service officers who have vests and pepper spray and other tools, we don't allow them in those similar circumstances, and they even have a higher level of training when there's weapons or much higher risk types of calls, unfortunately. So I don't know how we get over that, how we bridge that gap, because it's a pretty big leap to get over. But it's certainly something that there's been a lot of discussion about recently.
Thank you.
You bet.
So that was just kind of, I wanted to make sure that we all understood, I guess, before we kind of went into the discussion, a little bit more about the background of cahoots. And the APA, it came from a place back in the 80s that many victims of domestic violence is, the roots of it were just not following through. And so there'd be an abusive situation, the police would be called and they would say, I don't want to press charges, and the police would leave, and then it would often escalate to something more serious. So the legislature, put that in place. And so sometimes you have these things that hamstring the police, that require them to do things that they might not, it might fly in the face of what would work in a particular situation. But sometimes they're duty bound to do that. And I think that's the situation we're in here, is the safety of the family, the safety of cahoots, the safety of the officers in the community, and the requirements under the APA. I think it put it into an unfortunate situation. And so I think that's what makes it really hard, when people haven't been in situations and now they have this awful situation happen, and how to look back and how to see it differently. And like many things in policing, as we move forward with one thing, something else pops up that causes concern or problems. That we didn't used to have, the pepper spray or the tasers, and then we got those in, and because someone was injured or shot, and now we're having to lessen it down, and having to go back. And so I think it's always one of those things. It's like having multiple sources and available tools is a great thing, but sometimes the tools are restricted because of other policies or laws. So that's all I have right now.
Michael, go ahead. I'll just wait till I see a hand, or else you can just go ahead and jump in. Be a break.
Switch to new chairs. It's confusing.
We're all adults. Yeah, we can do it.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, I teach a lot about the APA, and it's a terrible law. I think that most people in the even in the anti-violence movement have come to realize that this was not particularly well thought through. It's had a lot of unintended consequences. It has not had a measurable impact on domestic violence, and yet it has had really destructive effects on particular poor families. There are often cases where law enforcement shows up, they're unable to determine who's the aggressors, so they arrest both parents. Children end up in custody of the state. In other instances, they'll arrest, in a heterosexual relationship, they'll arrest the wife because she is the one who appears to be the aggressor when they show up, because she's defending herself, when in fact the pattern of abuse for that relationship has been the opposite. It's had a lot of really awful effects because it is written so bluntly, requiring arrest when you respond in X, Y, and Z scenario. So it is, in my opinion, a pretty awful law, but hard to get rid of, apparently. That said, I want to just note that I had an experience. It was 3 years ago, almost to the day. My father, who was ill with Parkinson's and dementia, decided that I was there to kill him, and became very erratic. He punched my aunt, and I did not want to use force to restrain him, but had no choice. Tackled him and held him down for 45 minutes while he struggled and cursed and spit in my face. And my cousin, who was there, called the Clackamas County Sheriff, or called 911, who sent the Clackamas County Sheriff. I was so relieved when they got there, because it had been 45 minutes of holding down a surprisingly strong man in his 70s with Parkinson's. When the sheriff's officers arrived, they de-escalated the situation very nicely. I was nervous about what was going to happen. But they took me into a separate room, calmed me down, asked me what was going on. They got my dad calm. When he expressed concern that one of them was standing behind him, she moved into his eyesight so he could see her. And they called an ambulance. And the medics arrived in the ambulance. They took my father to the hospital. I presume that they could have chosen to arrest him at a later point, because arrest doesn't have to happen on the spot, especially if someone's been removed from the situation and is now under the care of medical doctors in a psych bed or psych room in the hospital. It turns out they never pressed any charges. So I'm not. I don't have a lot of confidence in the narrative of we had no choice, because I think that these are human situations and there's always some flexibility. There's always other ways to deal with this. In this particular case, the young man's what was she, a doctor or a psychiatrist, was on site, said they needed to go to the hospital. That choice was not made. Instead, there was so much body worn video to watch for this case, but only 30 seconds of it was really necessary for me. And that was from 8:42 p.m. and 22 seconds to 30 seconds after that. That's the point where it's clear that the officers are granted. Officers under a lot of pressure, they have to make split-second decisions. They can't all be good decisions. But they made the bad decision to, I would say, rush this young man who was just turning to becoming compliant, asked to put his shoes on. They didn't even let him put his shoes on. They saw an opportunity, which seemed tactical at the time, to take advantage of his apparent docility. And they escalated it. They escalated it from 0 to 60 by rushing him and reaching out and grabbing him, and everything goes from there. I think this is for people who don't know why anyone in their right mind would say that people shouldn't call the police when there's a crisis. This to me is exactly why. This is why I was afraid for my father when my cousin called the 911. This is such a heartbreaking case for so many reasons. Again, I know that we ask a lot of our law enforcement officers, and they can't always make the best decisions in hindsight. If Rick was here, he would be sure to let us know that we can't look in hindsight. But I don't buy the after the fact explanation that there was no other way to do this. And I don't think that 28 minutes is long enough to wait and then call it having slowed down a process. That's all I have for the beginning.
Thanks, Michael. Did I see a hand? Bill.
Thank you, Carolyn. This is one of the probably the worst calls that police have to go to. It's something that, an individual is having a mental issue that they can't control. The family's concerned about it. They don't know what to do. It's an adult that's having these issues, and the police have to go and try to figure out what to do. And I feel bad for everybody involved when these things have to happen. It's never a good place. I wish there were better things to be able to lean on in this situation, but there always isn't to do that. And as Bernadette pointed out, and we've talked about, there's rules that sometimes hamstring what we can do and not in these circumstances. But I say all that because when I watch the video and I look at this, there's so many questions I have and about tactics that were used, about what they did. We had a lot of officers that were trained in crisis intervention out there. My question to Kyle that hopefully he can answer either after I'm done or sometime was Lieutenant, is he trained in that? And I asked that question because he seemed to take over the call in handling this individual. But you know, you look around, we had lots of supervisors, and I look at these supervisors, they should be controlling this situation. They should be making good decisions. I see an officer carrying what looks like a long gun, which I thought through all the videos was a long gun that to protect them. Turns out it was the pepper ball. Mark asked that question during the interview. And I had to go back and actually look at the video to see when he pulled it out that it really was a pepper ball gun and not one of their long guns. But just the idea that what tactical use that had and why a supervisor didn't tell that officer to go put that away, why he went in the house with that. I mean, that is something that escalates any of these situations when you walk in with a large long gun and point it at somebody that's in a crisis. And you know, and I that falls on the supervisors. I mean, that they're there, they're looking at this. They should have said something and said, you know, we don't need that. Again, I get back to when they're in the house, what tactical purpose a paintball gun had, or I say paintball, pepper ball gun had, if this young man had a knife with him. That's not what's going to help them in that situation. So I just look at all of that. I look back to where it looked like they were having some good conversation. Again, I get back to the sergeant throws the phone in about 5 feet in the door. I mean, and then they all decide to go in. And then that's when the lieutenant takes over the talking with this young man, which should have been, why wasn't one of the negotiators in there? Why wasn't he the one talking to this young man to try to keep him calm and work him through this process? And I know it's always easy to look at these things going, we should have slowed down and done this, but when you have this level of supervision, you have, I think it's 2 or 3 sergeants, a lieutenant, somebody should have been in there saying, you know, we need to do something. We need to have supervisors that are better than this in their tactics of doing it. And I know it's a tough job and I know they're making split decisions, but I just think when I watched all of this, there was just so many things that should have been slowed down. They should have, again, you know, when they got the door open and they saw him, should have got a negotiator determining whether they should go in or whether they should talk to him from there. Again, putting the right people in charge of these situations and making sure that they stay in charge of them would have been a better way to do this. I'll stop there and let somebody else talk.
Bill, did you have a question that you wanted Kyle to answer specifically?
I did. If the lieutenant is one of that's trained in crisis negotiation, that he could be versus the other 2 that are part of that team?
The lieutenant would have crisis intervention team training, would not have, is not a crisis negotiator. I don't know if he has negotiations training in the past, and I don't think he was there in that capacity at that point in time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jose. I think you're ready.
Thank you. I'd like to second what Bill said, and I appreciate Bill bringing to our attention the multisensory kind of experience of, I think, what we think of when we think about what de-escalation is all about. I mean, we know. I mean, this isn't the first case where we're dealing with somebody who isn't necessarily usually using the rational part of the brain at the moment. And it seems to me, as I think about this, that the choice of force was made multiple times, and not just by like one officer necessarily. This is kind of like a total. I also appreciate Bill's comment that this was kind of like a team. I don't know, for lack of better words, violation here. That my question is, does the size of the mobilized police force, was that necessary in this case? It notes here that there were 4 crisis negotiation officers summoned. I'm not saying that there should or shouldn't. Perhaps somebody with more experience can say this is why we bring 4 instead of 1. But that was one of my questions: is was the size of this response necessary? And the choice of force, was made when they rushed this young man when he asked to put his shoes on. And again, I want to emphasize that I think that, like this has to be taken into account when we talk about de-escalation. Like, again, this multisensory sort of aspect of it, that, you could wait 30 minutes or 2 hours and still make a hasty or bad decision. And in this case, I just want to note that it seems like we need to talk about the use of force in kind of like a larger, maybe sort of systemic way. I know that when we're trying to make like adjudications here, that it's about policy, but I'm just wondering if someone with more experience could say, yeah, this is how we might talk about policy in like maybe a larger multi-person kind of event.
I don't know. Does anyone have a response to that? Kyle or Leah or
I was going to
Lindsay?
suggest Kyle. There he is.
Yeah, I just wasn't entirely sure if that was aimed towards us or the other CRB folks based on their experience. I would say that these are always evolving, flowing circumstances or situations. And if you've got 4 negotiators on and they're not tied up on other things, I was a crisis negotiator for 6 years. You always want to have, generally speaking, at least 2, because they can back each other up. You almost always negotiate in pairs at a basic level. The team is made up of, I think, 8 or 9 officers total. I think we had 7 when I was on the team. And all 7 of those on a protracted event wind up staying busy doing different tasks, from collecting information, keeping notes of what's been happening, doing research, intelligence, talking to people, interviewing friends and family and stuff if something becomes a more protracted event. So it doesn't surprise me in the least that 4 of them showed up. Usually strength in numbers, depending on how long something does continue. If they had backed out instead of seeing an opportunity and making entry, who knows how long this would have gone on. And so you might start trying different negotiators to see if one of them can build some kind of rapport. Sometimes the sound of your voice and the way you say words just doesn't build rapport with someone, and so you'll trade out and try somebody else again to build that trust and to try to. I'm dinging all over the place over here. Sorry about that. And so it doesn't necessarily surprise me. And what we also find is that, generally speaking, having more resources, we can always send people away. If we need more, it's harder to get them there in a hurry if we need them. And so I've had a lot of, I'll comment briefly also on the pepper ball again with Bill's comments there. I also have some concerns about the way that looks. I would disagree that the pepper ball isn't a useful tool there, because I do think that it has the potential to be able to be used in that circumstance. And anytime that we can use a less lethal device, even if it's multiple types of less lethal instead of our other tools, I don't think it's a bad thing to have there. I totally agree that it looks pretty menacing, and that some of those pepper ball guns that we have do look like long rifles. I had to look pretty hard at it. And I've had some thoughts about equipment management wise. There are other styles of pepper ball guns that look more toy-like, which are less menacing. They look more like paintball guns. as opposed to some of these that that our tactical officers have, which are more tactical oriented and need to be for the purpose that they use them in other calls. And so it's one of those things where we're dual purposing a piece of equipment because of the capability, but I do agree that having that hidden and out of sight until needed might have been a better approach with that piece of equipment than having it front and center and that potential emotional impact that has. So did I answer that about the resources piece? Okay.
Lindsay, anything generally?
So a lot of it's been said, so thank you all. And thank you, Michael, for going into the APA background. That's like super helpful. My overall comments are that this person belonged in the hospital, not the jail. So that was really upsetting to me. The entire thing is upsetting to watch. This is a very emotional case to review. So obviously the outcome of the arrest and then jail was just seems wholly and totally inappropriate. So whether that's changes to Oregon statute that looks at the intent, like, right, was there criminal intent or was this a mental health issue? Seems like a bare minimum change that should be made, if not a more radical reformation of the whole APA, which sounds like it might not be well conceived in the first place. And this person is collateral damage of that poorly written thing. So I will say the other thing that struck me when I was reviewing the case, so the interview with I'm going to call him the victim's mother was very illuminating for me and helpful. And she said something about the midway point in the 1.5-hour interview that really hit me, and that it was that what she needed was help a long time ago, not crisis response, right? So when it got to the point of crisis response, which the crisis response she wanted was cahoots. That wasn't available because of the brandishing of the knife and the circumstances. Cahoots was not an option. But even before the crisis, she was saying, what I need is more help. What we need is more mental health resources. What we need are things much farther upstream, which I think it's important to keep bringing up. At the point it becomes a crisis, whether it's cahoots or whether it's police, we're still creating crisis by underfunding and under-resourcing things that are going on farther up the pipeline. And then that necessitates a crisis response, whether it's cahoots or police, when it would be much better and humane, and the outcomes would be better to prevent the crisis. So that's just my soapbox about that. She put it just really well, and it struck me. The other thing that I will say is that I am also dissatisfied with the outcome and how things they were going at kind of a steady pace for a while and then seemed to rush all of a sudden it's not for no reason. I won't say for no reason, for reasons that I don't agree with. But if I were to compare it to a case which had a much worse outcome, of the veteran with PTSD who was shot and killed by police a couple of years ago, some things that I noticed in this case that I thought were better was that there wasn't any hailing of him via megaphone. There wasn't an armored vehicle in his front yard. There was sort of a more discreet perimeter around the house. And at the beginning, I was really, at the video, I was so hopeful that they were going to play for time. I was so hopeful. And then it sort of all unraveled, like Michael said, in that 30-second window. All of a sudden, anything that had leading up to that had some promise of slowing things down and leading to a more peaceable outcome were sort of tossed out the window. So I think that's all I'll say in this section. Thanks.
All right, thanks everybody. I think I don't have much to add. I think that you all made really good points, and I think that it seems like there's a lot of agreement on the board that it wasn't handled with as much de-escalation as it could have been. Well, I shouldn't speak for everyone. That's how I feel. I think that they did employ lots of good de-escalation strategies, but in the end, it failed to de-escalate. We can move into the other kind of 3 topics, and Rick sent me comments in the topics that maybe he would have said during this last part, but we'll just keep it in that to keep his comments in line. So I'll start with his comments on complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring. If that's all right. He said this complaint was classified and investigation This complaint was classified and investigation was accomplished very quickly. I thought the investigation was thorough and unbiased. That's the end of that sentence. And I agree. I think that it was thorough. I did really appreciate how quickly it happened. A lot of the cases we see are months and months old, or even over a year old, and it's nice that this one was only a few months. So I appreciate that whole process. Bernadette.
I think there was a comment that was sent into us that was questioning maybe part of the investigation. And I just wanted to comment on the investigation that the auditor is required to do is only of the particular allegation. So in this case, the allegation was de-escalation used, and I think it's probably a very focused moment. Was de-escalation used in basically the less than 5 minutes inside the house? Is that right, Leah? You can just nod. Right. So I think the question about whether other people were interviewed about the appropriateness of the lieutenant's actions, there might not have been an outside agency conversation outside the police agency, because those weren't people that were there to witness the moment in time of the allegation itself of the de-escalation. I agree that the intake was done well. How quickly this was done, the investigation and monitoring, there was I question whether the need to attach all of the videos is necessary, but then again, narrowly focusing the videos, because the complaint in time is, again, from the moment kind of going into the house, to the end of it is kind of more the focus of what we do. And so, but obviously all of the things leading up to it are important, but having a focused time of this is the time of the actual incident, I think would have been helpful. And well, I won't go into that right now. Michael, you said something about 28 minutes, and I wasn't sure what the 28 minutes referred to, because I saw that this was 1 hour and 37 minutes. And so I think, so most of the videos were, obviously quite lengthy, but trying to get to, what part of the video and whose video. And that was one of the things that it was how it was listed out in our book, and then how it was listed out on the thing. Maybe if it had the gigabytes on it, that would have helped me figure out which ones were in the list of 20, I think it was. So just my thoughts.
Just a quick response, if that's okay. So it was on pages aren't numbered. It was on the last page of Mark's memo. I think that's the last page of Mark's memo. Yes. And as indicated in Captain's memo, and then the 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet point, officers slowed the scene down by spending over 28 minutes attempting to establish two-way dialogue.
Thank you. I wasn't sure what the 28 minutes was referring to, so thank you.
It was confusing because I was also referring to 8:42 p.m. and 22 seconds. There's a lot of twos flying around.
All right. Any other comments on the complaint intake classification, investigation, and monitoring? Jose?
I just have a question. So can we establish that when police responded, they knew this was a schizophrenic episode, or that this was a mental health crisis? Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just, it was in the call details when the reporting party called in to dispatch. That's the wording that was used.
So my question, I think I have two questions then. As I'm hearing everybody, and tell me if I'm wrong, the APA is triggered when an allegation of menacing, when it's the allegation of menacing, regardless of whether it's mental health or not. Is that correct? Okay. I can understand your comments, Lindsay. From that, that's where I'm trying to get. That's my way into this next question. Yeah, I just want to reiterate, why not take him to the hospital then if everyone knew that was the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those situations, and Kyle can probably speak to a lot better than I can, having made that choice before, probably. But yeah, I'm gonna let Kyle start talking.
Before we get there, is that relevant though with regards to what we're supposed to be investigating and reviewing? I'm not saying that that's not something we should discuss, but I just want to make sure I understand that. Does it relate to what our charge is, which is understanding whether the officer or lieutenant in this case actions violated policy or not?
I see what you're saying. I think in this case, the allegation of de-escalation, I think the central point in the escalating of the event was the decision that there was a mandatory arrest that needed to be made, because once that decision was made, that arrest was going to happen and jail was probably going to happen. But I think Kyle may be able to speak to that more than I can. So I think you're right. It's not central to the consideration, but I think if the group wants to talk about it, I'm okay with that.
I would just submit that my understanding and training of the APA laws is a little bit different than what Michael has said. And I don't know the circumstances around his incident in detail, but my understanding is that we don't have the discretion to wait and try to arrest somebody later, that if there's a crime, that the arrest needs to happen as soon as possible. And I think that's, I have not had a case where we did not make an arrest at the scene. When we had probable cause, we had a person in hand as to who the primary aggressor was. So.
I don't want to mess up the format too much, but just to say, I imagine if someone, I think part of the problem is the difficulty we have as a society understanding mental illness. And I imagine if someone was suffering from a stab wound and was bleeding, you would stop at the hospital on the way to the jail if you had to arrest them. And so I just don't know. The jail doesn't seem to me to be the best first stop for someone who is in the middle of a psychotic episode.
I would agree that we are all on the same page with that. It's not uncommon that we don't always like the outcome or like what we're bound to do. Unfortunately, sometimes there are times where the laws are what they are. Certainly, if somebody has a stab wound and they need immediate medical care for a physical wound, they're going to go to the hospital. Oftentimes, we wind up having officers posted there for many hours until they're released and released to the jail. And mental illness presents a unique challenge there because we can't post somebody at the behavioral health unit for that period of time. But they also there's a challenge with remaining in our custody. And so it is a complicated, difficult process. I think what I have learned from these is that when we get to this sort of a situation, there've been many, many failures along the way for society to provide the tools and options necessary to folks. And while we oftentimes are able to navigate positive outcomes, it's very challenging when the police become involved in these incidents. And so it just, unfortunately, sometimes we don't get the positive outcome that we would like. But I think it's also necessary to also understand that when we get to these points, there's been a failure of many other systems that we all see and we're all frustrated by. And I wish that things could have been different that night for their family. And I certainly feel for all of them involved. It was an unfortunate outcome all the way around.
One more. Sorry, if I may, thank you, Kyle. For Bernadette, the reason I was asking these questions is because, I'm going to come back to that, the totality of the circumstances aspect of this that I appreciate learning about from you all. And, in policy 800.2.2, determining the reasonableness of force, C states that the influence of drugs and alcohol on the subject's physical and mental capacity and their threshold for pain or reason. That has to come into play here. I would assume that has to come in play here again when officers are responding to a mental health crisis. I'm not saying I know to what degree that has to bear on somebody's ability to make a decision in that moment. I think the question was that I needed to get straightened out for me was, did the folks who responded know that this was an episode? And that has been answered for me. Thank you.
Right, and sorry, Bill, I appreciate that. It was just going to the point of asking why the person was not transported to a mental health unit at the hospital as opposed to the jail. I think while I don't think it's something we shouldn't discuss, I just worry that sometimes like the case last month where a person had a broken arm, the broken arm in and of itself was not evidence of unlawful use of force. And so I just worry that by saying that this person was taken to the jail as opposed to the mental health unit, behavioral health unit, that might be considered part of the not de-escalating. So, but thank you.
Bill, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was gonna just give my input about the complaint intake, if that's okay, Carolyn. So I think the complaint and the classification was right. I think it was a good and thorough investigation. I don't know about your packet, Bernadette, but mine included on the videos where to go to get the 5 minutes that we needed to watch for this investigation. Thank you, Vicki. I apologize if yours didn't have that, Bernadette, but they did do that. But I did go back and look at other parts of the videos to see how some of the stuff happened prior to and after. But I think overall they did a thorough job on all this.
All right, I want to be aware of our time. I noticed that we're at the time that we are scheduled to take a break. I'm fine continuing this conversation. I think we're not quite done yet. Would you like to, I propose that we maybe just take a shorter break so we can continue this conversation. Do you want to? Okay. Is there anything else to add about complaint intake and classification before we move on to EPD policies, practices, and training? Lindsay?
I'll just say I always want all the video, even though it is time consuming and laborious to look through, particularly in this case, because there were so many officers, I had like 8 points of view. And so I appreciate the waiting issue. I feel your pain and I always want all the video. I don't have any other further comments.
All right, I'll start with Rick and then we'll go to Bernadette for policies and trainings. Rick said the policy on de-escalation is reasonable in that it allows consideration of the circumstances of contact and requires a review based on what we should, on that which should be expected of a reasonable officer in the place of the party against whom the complaint is filed under the circumstances existing at the time. Perfection is not required. The officer is not to be viewed in light of after effects or hindsight. I think, Michael, you called that one, right? Of particular importance in this case is a statutory requirement in Oregon law mandating arrest in a situation where an arrested person in a familial relationship with the victim brandishes a weapon and in doing so place the victim in a situation where there is imminent risk of bodily harm. The statute does not allow for discretion on the officer's part in the arrest. Bernadette, do you want to comment next on EPD policies?
Yeah, I was just going to comment briefly. I know when the first time I was on this board 10 years ago, crisis intervention training was, it was not something that everyone was required to do. And so I think it's really great that we've gotten to the point that everyone on the police force has now had crisis intervention training. Obviously, doesn't mean that it's always going to be done exactly the way that we would like it to happen. I think probably obviously we don't hear about the cases where there were interventions by police or cahoots that went really well. And so, I mean, I think that's always something I have to keep in the back of my mind when I see something like this that is so heart-wrenching. It's so hard to review and to read. And unfortunately that this was the family that had to suffer through this. And then I have to kind of like bring myself back to, you know, how many other families fortunately didn't have this outcome. And it's, I know that's not solace for the people that went through this. But for me, knowing that there over the years of the training, I have to hold on to that I know that it has gotten better and that it has saved many families. The crisis of, you know, just as the fact that we have tasers has saved the crisis of family members being shot and by police. So I try to always remember that, but doesn't make reading a case like this and evaluating a case like this any easier.
Bill and then Michael, comments on.
So, thank you. I guess I'll try to keep it short. You know, I think the policy is written. I think the premise we have to remember is in this case, and that there was an arrest that they believe they needed to make based on the law. And so a de-escalation is used, and I think the policy is written well, that it sort of takes the officers down that path where they ultimately need to do something and try to get them there as best they can. It doesn't always work perfectly, but I think at least it does that. You know, and I agree with Bernadette, having all the officers have crisis intervention training, I think is important to help at least get them thinking and trying to work through that de-escalation process. So that's all I'll say about that. Thank you.
Michael and Lindsay.
Yeah, so I know we've talked about this policy before. And so for those in the audience, these policies are available on the website of the city somewhere. So it says, so officers should make every reasonable effort to de-escalate confrontations to prevent the need to use force. When a subject's actions create an imminent threat to the public or to officers, it is expected that officers will respond with reasonable and decisive force. So I'm just reading those two sentences and then thinking about those 30 seconds of video. And, you know, I think that I understand, again, as when I had to wrestle my father to the ground, it wasn't something I wanted to do. And I understand that force is necessary. I understand that police officers in particular are asked to use force in ways that other members of society are not. And that is a part of their job. But that force, it seems to me, shouldn't be provocatory or escalating. All right? I think that what I see in this policy, or what I hope I see in the spirit of this policy, is that force is called for when, when a subject's actions create an imminent threat to the public or to officers. I don't see the imminent threat in those 30 seconds of video. There was a threat at some point earlier in the evening. And it's unclear where this evening would have gone, right? We don't know that. But I just can't say that there was an imminent threat at the point where force was used. I don't know if that's the right place to say that. I was talking about the policy and then I kind of veered off.
Lindsay and Jose.
No, I just wholly agree with honing in on that sentence. When a subject's actions create an imminent threat to the public or to the officers. My observation of what was happening in the moment that officers decided to multiple officers decided to kind of rush this person and put their hands on them, was that the subject's actions were passive. They were relatively compliant with what the officers were asking them to do. They were making a relatively reasonable request to put their shoes on, which I would imagine sort of follows with going outside, right? Wouldn't that be a logical thing that you would ask to do if you were on your way outside with the officers as they were requesting? So that, yeah, imminent threat seems questionable. I do have one question, and I apologize because I probably should already know this, and this is for Kyle. Is the application of handcuffs considered a use of force?
I would not consider the application of handcuffs a use of force in and of itself. I would also like to point out that it's the de-escalation policy is to be used in conjunction with the use of force policy, which goes into far more detail. And that line that you guys are reading is certainly an important one, but also doesn't encompass all of the times and places where we would use force or could use force. And so it's a complicated discussion that's hard to evaluate that one line in this circumstance by itself without considering, or at least calling the consideration of the use of force policies in general, such as 800, which goes into a lot more detail about that. So
just for the public, if you want to follow along in all your spare time, policy 820 and policy 800 are the two that we're talking about, which are in the police operations manual, which you can find on the police website under policies.
I'll put links in the chat.
Can I ask one? Was the pepper? Sorry to go out of order, but was the pepper ball policy also linked to this one, or was that? I feel like I saw that somewhere and then didn't. Was that part of this?
In the PowerPoint, just because there was a pepper.
PowerPoint.
But
because it reminded me that I've actually been hit with pepper ball before, and it's not that bad in my humble opinion. But I will say that it wouldn't have stopped someone with a knife from it won't stop someone with a knife from charging you, or at least if I had a knife and was charging someone, the experience I had being hit with it wouldn't have stopped me. So again, I'm not sure like what it was doing.
Okay, Jose.
I have a lot more to talk about. I think everybody does, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time. One thing that I would like to ask Mark and Leah about, we don't have to discuss it right now, was 800.5 looked at in this scenario, in this case? Medical attention for injuries sustained. I'm sorry I keep coming back to that, but
you do not have to apologize.
That's one of the aspects of this case that makes me upset, is that Yeah, it is precisely that. So that's just the last kind of question I had. You don't have to address it now. Maybe you can shoot
No,
me
that's okay.
if you want to.
I mean, to the extent that I can. So, and this is going to be based on my memory of the discussions that I was a part of on this one, because it wasn't my case. And so, if I recall correctly, there were sort of umbrella concerns about how the entire contact was handled. And so Mark is the decider of he's the classifier. So his hope in specifically calling out the highest ranking supervisor and the de-escalation policy was that we could look at the whole picture of all the decisions that were made. And Kyle may know more than I do about that specific part. I'm going to look up that policy just to make sure I know what I'm speaking to, but yes. So my bet is that them calling medics would have been how that was addressed. But Kyle, if you want to jump in.
And sorry, real quick, Kyle, I just hope that the comments that I'm making are coming across in a spirit of asking questions rather than being accusatory. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, certainly. And I try to be careful about not sounding argumentative in my explanations too. So I think we're all trying to walk a line of better understanding each other and trying to help explain. And I can at times come across as argumentative. So I do try to be conscientious of that. Yeah, so medics were called, he was evaluated at the scene, and medics released him, not seeing that there was physical injury that needed to be treated in any way. Well, I can't say that. There wasn't any additional medical treatment, emergency medical treatment that was needed. I can't say for sure that there wasn't some conversation. I don't recall. He was cleared for transport to the jail.
Okay, so I think the question that I have that I need to be able to assess this fully, and again, I'm sorry for taking up more time, is that it seems like I'm having a difficult time parsing between like physical health and mental health, and I think that's kind of like a tacit thing that's happening in different ways at different times in this case. So again, I appreciate.
And in this respect, in this situation, they're very different things. And so the medical treatment is medical, not mental health. And so that check is done. And I think we all struggle with seeing someone in a mental crisis go into jail. It's not the best outcome.
I want to just jump in and say that I think it's okay that we're going over time. In my opinion, I think this is a complicated case and it deserves our full comments and our full consideration. So I've asked Leah to maybe cut her report a little bit shorter so we do have extra time. And we don't have the parking lot closing on us like we do at the library. So if we do go over 8 o'clock, it won't be the end of the world. I mean, feel free to leave. I don't want to assume that everyone can stay past 8, but is that reasonable? Okay. That was everybody for policies and trainings. Let's move on to adjudication recommendations. Again, I'll start with Rick. So forgive me. I agree with the captain and the police auditor in the conclusion that the conduct complained of was within policy. Both reviewers did a very good job of analyzing a case where emotion could side with the arrested person and family. Plenty of time passed while very calm attempts to talk the arrestee down were attempted. A pause took place as the lieutenant entered the home, and it appeared that the arrestee was going to comply. Arrest was not discretionary, it was mandatory. Once the officers were in the home, it became apparent that the arrestee was not going to comply with all escalation thereafter occurred as a result of the necessity to complete the arrest as mandated. I understand that the mother and father were concerned that better care might have been available through the Johnson unit. However, the mother and father had been realistically had realistically been threatened with a weapon, and the mother stated that the son had struck her earlier in the week, indicating that he was capable of using force on his parents. Couple that history with the use of a kitchen knife, the reasonable course of action involved, the path chosen. I'm going to point out that Rick is a lawyer. That felt very lawyerly to read that. So that's Rick's comments. Bernadette and then Bill, please share yours.
I agree with the adjudication recommendations. I think one thing that I just need to mention is when I was at some point, they used to have a Eugene Police Academy, Citizens Police Academy here in Eugene. And I was fortunate enough to be in that process and go through that. And what I took away from that was, you know, as much as I have seen these things and reviewed these cases and watched these videos, there's still that momentary split-second decision that you don't know what's coming at you. And at the end of the police academy, they give you these 5 different scenarios that you go into and that people come up to you. And so while I know that, you know, it makes sense that he's bending over to put on their shoes because they're going outside, and that's a reasonable thing. I also know that one of the scenarios in the police academy, Citizens Police Academy, was something similar where somebody who was kind of bent over and then they came at you, can't see me, quite quickly like this. And most people that went through it pulled out their gun in the Citizen Police Academy and shot the person that was coming at them with something. Knowing that it wasn't a real life situation, I just grabbed their hand and twisted it because it's like, I know I'm not going to really get hurt. But I tell you this because, you know, it was naive of me to think that it was just going to be a cell phone and, you know, that I could twist their hand and put them away, because I wasn't in a life or death, you know, situation. I knew I wasn't going to be hurt in anything that was going on there. So I always remember that, in the sense that when this person bends over to put on their shoes, when they know that there has been a knife at some point in time, that we don't always know, you know, that it's always going to be an okay thing. That, you know, we hope it's going to be an okay thing, but we have to always remember that sometimes it's not going to be an okay thing. And so what I appreciate about this board is that, you know, this is a two-way education. This is, you know, the public is listening to us and how we review these things, and hopefully understanding a little bit more of the process that the police go through and why they take the actions that they take. And we are reviewing this and then being the voice of the public back to the police department through Jason and Kyle and the auditor's office and the police commission, to be able to say, yes, while it was within policy, we wish it could have been done differently, and maybe it could have been done differently by doing this. And so while I agree with the adjudication recommendation, I think there's always the room for education and improvement. And I think this is a situation that allows the police department to look at and say, how could we do it differently? How can we do it better?
Thanks, Bill. And then Michael.
Thank you. So I will say this was a very tough case to go through and read the adjudications on. But I do agree with them when I look at the policy and the actions of the person, and Bernadette brings a great point across. I actually attended that same, not the same one she was in, but the Citizens Police Academy when they had it. And things do happen fast, and sometimes you don't know. And so, you know, the use of force then escalated as they tried to just grab him to control his arms. And then it went through there. As I said in the beginning, there's a lot of things that I think should have been done better. And I think, and as I read, you know, the adjudication from the captain, you know, he does bring out that same point that this is a training that he wants to go back and talk to people about to do that. So, so hopefully will learn a lot, and they'll be able to go back and do some better training with supervisors on how to handle this in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Michael, and then Lindsay, please.
So, I like as other people, I had a lot of difficulty with this one. I think that I respect Mark so much, and I also respect the fact that the people who were investigating this, Mark is the auditor, just know a lot more and have a lot more history evaluating these kinds of things. So, with that said, I don't agree with adjudication. And I know that I'm probably the person most likely to disagree with the adjudication. But I think that I look at these policies, and even the use of force policy, which is much longer. Given that the suspect wasn't posing an imminent threat, given that there were other ways to deal with the situation, given that there wasn't a press for time, this wasn't a business establishment that was going to close down. This wasn't a public place where crowds are going to start coming through. I mean, there's so many things. If there was ever a case where things could have been done differently, it's here. And it just, watching the body cam footage, it's just clear to me that a decision was made. The suspect didn't rush the officers, they rushed him. And as far, I don't know how EPD considers this, but to me, if someone rushes you and grabs your wrists, that's force. And the guy had just been lying down on the couch under a blanket, like literally 30 seconds earlier. I disagree very respectfully.
Lindsay, and then Jose.
So I also disagree with the adjudication. I am pleased that we looked at the de-escalation policy. I think that was the right choice. And I'm glad that we're seeing that classified more often. So first, I'm glad that we have a de-escalation policy. That's a significant difference from when I first started serving on the board. There was no de-escalation policy. So there is a policy. And now I'm glad that I've seen it classified so that it's considered. And I disagree with the adjudication.
I also disagree with the adjudication in that convenience is not an aspect of this policy. And so I would look forward to more discussion in the future about how to assess that. But I'm not convinced that had to happen right then and right there, in that manner. As folks were talking, I was looking at 800.2.1, force in making an arrest or preventing an escape. As I witnessed things, subjectively, suspect wasn't, this young man wasn't escaping. It wasn't about preventing an escape. And I agree with, I agree with Michael that this young man didn't rush or approach, from what I saw on the video. Thank you.
I'll just add my thoughts quickly. I don't know if I think it was within or not within policy. In some ways, I do agree that the way that the policy is written, the officers did follow the policy, especially considering, well, the last paragraph in Mark's, it's the last paragraph. I don't see like a sign off from him, so I assume it's the last paragraph, but where he says it's regrettable that the officers went hands-on. The victim, the suspect, did resist, and at that point, I think it changes a little bit. It shifts the amount of force that is necessary to continue the arrest. I think if the suspect hadn't resisted, then there probably wouldn't have been the taser probably wouldn't have been deployed, and there would have been less force. So it's a complicated thing. I do say that even if it is within policy, as everyone adjudicated, or as those three adjudicated, it's not a good situation, and it isn't. It's a very unfortunate situation, and I don't want to just downplay that at all by saying that I might have reason to agree that it's within policy. I think that's where I will end it. Leah?
So I know I've said this was not my case, but Mark talked a lot about it as he was thinking about it. I think this one weighed on him a lot. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. And I also, I think this is one of those cases where, unfortunately, we've had similar ones where we can say something's within policy, and that doesn't mean that we approve of it. It doesn't mean that it's what we want. It doesn't mean that it's how we wish the situation would have gone. So I need to make sure that gets said. That within policy means that in Mark's estimation, or in my estimation, based on how the policy is written, the officers didn't commit misconduct in how they acted. So if there are policy questions, then I think Michael mentioned one, but I think this is one of those where we like to have discussion around it, because I think if what the community wants and what the policy outlines are not meeting up, that this is the avenue for that to get fixed. So that's all I'll say.
All right. I think that I need a couple minutes, so let's take a quick break. I see that it's 7:18 on my clock. Should we come back at 7:21? 3 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay. 7:23. Okay. Add her voice and votes. But we still have a quorum. Yes, very fully. Yeah. So we can continue.
As soon as Michael gets back.
Yeah. I was doing the counting. Leah, do you have a like a slideshow for this case, since it's not really a case? No. Okay.
I debated doing one, and then I chose not to. But I
Makes sense.
about sort of the thought process and behind what was behind it.
I thought we told you to do one.
Yeah, and to deliver cookies to our homes, but you didn't do that either.
I think we asked.
I got cookies.
Give me a raise. I might have chicken in my teeth. Sorry.
So this month, I'll do a little introduction to why we chose to do this case, if that's okay, Leah, unless that's what you were going to do. So when we were talking about which cases to investigate or to discuss, we wanted to do the first one, obviously, and it's done. But now the other one was the what do we say? What are we calling this one? Incident review arising out of a vehicle collision at a protest. And I think the reason that we wanted to do this one is because it is a complicated case also. The fact that we had, I think, 74 complaints about this incident. And then it led to an investigation that didn't end up, oh my gosh, what am I even saying? That didn't end up with an allegation, right, Leah? So I think that it was important to me that the public kind of hear the whole scope of this case, because it was such a publicly visible case. And I wanted to explain that. And then we talked about how this could kind of also fit into our training topic about how this whole process works and how some cases get an allegation tied to them and some don't. So that's why we chose this. Is that correct, Bernadette and Leah? Is that good summary? Okay. So Leah, did you have a little outline to show us without a slideshow?
No, I had words to talk to you.
Perfect.
That's okay. I figured this way you guys can ask me questions and we can see each other's faces, and it seemed to make a little more sense. It does get frustrating to me when I'm doing the PowerPoints because I can't actually see if you all are like booing me or anything like that. So
this is a full-on unmute everybody and ask questions as they come up sort of thing, like we do.
just said unmute everybody. Nope. No, just kidding. Unmute, obviously, if you have questions, please, or just, I should notice you. So yeah, so as Carolyn said, we got a lot of community interest in, I think probably everyone has heard of this case. There was a children's march, and during that march, someone who was participating in the march, well, a car came by and the person alleged that they were hit by the car, and protesters followed the car. Police ultimately responded, and then we got a lot of complaints that there wasn't sufficient law enforcement action taken at the scene and that there wasn't a sufficient investigation into the crime. So this is one of those, it's really a difficult, like when we get complaints about that kind of thing, that there wasn't sufficient law enforcement action or not sufficient investigation, those are hard for our office to jump in on because, for example, when there's a criminal investigation, it gets reviewed by the DA. The DA decides whether to charge. There's a whole review for criminal investigations that already occurs. So oftentimes, and what happened here is we get that investigation when it's complete, and in this case, it was lengthy. And if we find that there was misconduct or policies that weren't followed, then we would open an allegation. And in this case, we didn't find that. We found an extremely thorough investigation. We were gonna try to, they did a accident reconstruction of it, and I was gonna have that person here to talk more, and he has offered to answer questions, but he also has to be at the ad hoc committee meeting. So, but I wanted to mention that this is one of those issues where it comes in, it's obviously a huge amount of community importance. We reviewed what actions we could. We did not find misconduct, but it still got reviewed. And so you can kind of see what we included was the summary, our intake summary, basically, with all the people who complained. And then Jason, in this case, but usually an internal affairs sergeant, writes up a memo on an incident review to explain, this is what we did, this is what we looked at, this is why we didn't feel we needed to escalate to an allegation of misconduct investigation. So that's kind of what we included here. I'm happy to discuss if you have other questions about what else occurred. But I liked what Carolyn and Bernadette were thinking with, this can kind of be a case study of like how our classification and investigation system works when we don't end up with a typical blue folder. That's my spiel. Jump in. Bill.
So I guess I apologize because I think I was supposed to say that I knew some of the officers in the first case. Leah and I had talked about this earlier today. And I knew the investigator from working on a police commission. Sergeant Williams and I have spent a lot of time together over the last few years. But neither one of those affected my case. I also want to say that I know the sergeant who conducted the investigation in the current case we're talking about. He also was the sergeant in charge of policy writing for the department when I was on the commission before Kyle took that position. So, and I've ridden with him in his car a couple times. So, but again, I don't think that'll affect my discussion of this. Did I do that right, Leah?
Good job, Bill. Thank you.
You did it perfectly, and it reminded me that I have childhood connections to some of these people also, and it also doesn't affect my ability to be fair. Thanks for that reminder. That's a good reminder to keep because
I have old brain. I don't remember who I know and who I don't know anymore. But yes, I recognize some of the names as well.
And I should say that the criminal charges in this are also ongoing, which does make it a little complicated. Just an overview of publicly available information is that the criminal case was presented by the DA to a grand jury. The grand jury declined to file criminal charges against the driver. EPD then cited that person for careless driving, failure to stop, I think, failure to yield to a
Pedestrian.
That's it. And I checked, and that was supposed to be set for trial today. So I don't know where it is right now, but that part is ongoing. So that's sort of another complicating factor.
Just a quick correction. I believe you said criminal, but I think that in Sergeant Barrett's thing it says non-criminal citations.
Yes, sorry. So it's in municipal court, not circuit court. So that's that level. It's
not because it's in municipal court that makes it non-criminal. It's because it's traffic infractions that make it non-criminal. He can't be sent to jail.
Thank you.
Can only be fined for bad driving or bad actions in his car.
Battle of the lawyers.
So I think what was interesting about this one is obviously the number of complaints. I think Carolyn and I thought that would make, that people saw this, heard about it, read about it, and thought it was important enough to, be concerned about it. And I think what's telling about this case is that the actions of the many people seeing what's going on, but nobody actually seen the actual event. And so, while they didn't see the actual event to be able to support the actual criminal charges through the DA's office, I think that they still wanted to make sure that, everything was seen and heard and discussed. And so I appreciated that we still have this process to look at things, and that we still have, that we can review whether or not the officers did what they should be doing. That they went to the scene, they had, they investigated, after the fact, they went and looked for people and investigated, and, presented it as though, was there anything that was a concern that should have been done differently? And we don't often see, situations where we're kind of looking at them and saying, oh, but they should have, they should have done more in the case. I mean, usually it's something they did in the case that we look at and say, we wish they'd kind of done it differently, but we're not usually looking at facts and saying that they should have investigated more. Usually we're looking at the investigators and seeing if they should have investigated more. And so I thought that was kind of interesting in this case that, we're looking at it as, did the officers complete their job by investigating fully? And then did the auditor's office investigate fully? And then just, but didn't find anything to really bring to us. So.
Bill. I don't know, Carolyn, I'm jumping in because I'm presenting.
It's taking over your job,
fine.
Carolyn.
No, it's totally fine because, I don't even know if we need to call on people. We could just
Okay, everyone
friendly
unmute.
for second graders and just unmute, make faces. Go ahead, Bill.
So, well, I want to thank you for bringing this case to our attention. I think this is what some of the things we need to look at, because when people talk about that they're dissatisfied with what police services they're getting or doing that, which by the amount of complaints, there was some people that felt like things weren't being done, and that it then, again, reinforces that this process that we've created with the auditor gives people another avenue to say, I want somebody else to look at to make sure what our police department is doing and they're doing it well. And then having internal affairs look at this from their standpoint. I think that was, I think this was a great example to bring to us to look at that is different than what one of our normal cases was. And I appreciate you doing that.
So I'll echo what people said, but I also, So I don't really know what to say about this one because there's not much here. I mean,
No.
I will say that I, having read now things written by numerous members of EPD, and as a former composition teacher, I appreciate Sergeant Barrett's prose. He's a good writer. But what we get, unlike the other case this evening, where we had so much we could look at, we had interviews with people, we were able to view body cam footage. I feel like this time what I have is like the final summary, and nothing else. And so I don't know what to say about it. I can say that given the level of interest in this from the public that people have commented on, that's evidenced by so many reports on this. Of course, it was also a time when people were cued in to do this sort of thing. But I think it's unfortunate that so many parts of our criminal justice process are shielded from the kind of public scrutiny that this meeting has. So, for example, a cynic might say that grand juries generally do whatever DAs want them to. It's rare for a grand jury to do something that the DA is really opposed to. But we don't get to see grand jury proceedings. Grand juries see things that the public doesn't get to see. DA's decisions are very much outside of the public purview. And so a cynic might say, we have here just 3 elements of a system lining up together to cover each other. I'm not saying that, but the kind of person whose trust are the policies that we put in place as a city is designed to earn, I don't think that trust is going to be earned by this. I think that, and I don't think that's necessary. I'm not saying that that's in anyone's control. I think that so much of this is just, it's unfortunate that, I remember an angry caller calling us to give public comment in June, I think it was, essentially saying that this board and the auditor's office and EPD and everything else connected with law enforcement and criminal justice was all just a sham to cover up. I forget what it was designed to cover up, but I sometimes feel helpless at disabusing people of that, because I don't know what happened. I can trust, because I am the kind of person who trusts that these formal processes generally work. I can trust that this investigation happened and that it was done well, but I just don't know if that's going to be the case for the however many people it was, 64 you said, who complained.
Yeah, well, and sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Oh, you muted yourself. Okay, that's a clue. So Carolyn and Bernadette, and I saw Carolyn, sorry, Carolyn, you were going to talk, but I was going to say that was an intentional choice to not give you the full file. But if you want a deeper dive, we can talk about that, but I see Carolyn's going to talk, so I'm going to shut up. That's
pretty much what I was going to say, is that we wanted to put it out there that this is a case we could look at more deeply if we wanted to. The problem with doing that with this case, in my opinion, is that the body cam footage would just be the officers talking to the driver, and I guess, and the other witnesses too. We could have that also, but we don't have any actual footage of the event, so it's tricky, and I don't know that it really fits into the purview of us, because as Jason and the other people who were as Jason found, that there wasn't enough evidence to support the allegations. And I think Leah's office, you guys also weighed in on that, saying that there wasn't enough evidence. We could look at the entire investigative report, correct? Like, we could see the traffic reenactment and everything. And I agree, Michael, that this doesn't this doesn't necessarily give faith to somebody who has no faith in the system. Yeah, so we could look at this more deeply if that's something that the board wants to do.
I think one of the things that we had a case, well, I mean, for us to look at it more, instead of really be looking at whether the officers, it's kind of, I guess, that fine line or double-edged sword. It's like, are we looking to see whether the officers didn't investigate fully, which is kind of what the allegation was by the people calling in, is that the officers didn't do their job by investigating fully. And so I think we have enough to say whether or not they did their job and investigated fully. If we were to look at the entire report, we would be looking at more saying that the DA, the grand jury, didn't do their job by ending up charging the person. And so I think that's kind of why we held back on not sending everything, because then we're trying to put ourselves in the place of, you know, the DA or the grand jury and saying that more charges should have been coming in, which reminds me of the case that went before, one of our cases that we reviewed, that somebody wanted to get our files on. And we said, if you want files, you need to go to the legislature and change the public records law. But instead they went to court to try and get the files. And the judge basically said, you know, this is kind of a cat in the hat, that it's like, you know, at what point is it enough? You know, it's like, we're going to review the police and then somebody's going to review us. And then is somebody going to review them? And so, you know, they said, you know, at some point, you know, it goes back to the legislature that, you know, we get the things, we get to review them, and, you know, we have to trust that that we're doing what the public wants us to do, and that we're being the voice for them, and we don't get to share the things with them. There are plenty of times when I review these files, and I think the best thing for the public and the police would be to, release the entire file. But that's not our decision to make. I think, again, I think the legislature needs to change the public records law to allow more of these things to be reviewed by people, so they can, that's the only way I see trust really ever being completely built, is, that everybody can review everything, because obviously people don't trust that we're actually representing them, their voices and their opinions in what we review. And I mean, we're not representing everybody. I mean, it's like we have our group that we know and our backgrounds, and we represent from that perspective. And I think it would be better if more people could get the things. And then maybe there could be some trust, Michael. I mean, I think, we can only do so much to kind of forward the trust. I think that's kind of what we're supposed to do. I mean, I think it's one of the hopes of what the system would do, is that would show that there's some trust in the system. But I don't see that. I don't see that we can get there without the public records law changing.
Thanks, and I also thank you for pointing out, or for reminding me that the allegation, the specifics of how the allegation was distilled, which was that EPD detained but then released the man who did. So yeah, so I was confusing it with the grand jury, which came up with in the synopsis. It does remind me that I think a good thing that this county needs is something like this at the county level. I think that the kind of oversight processes that we have as a city would be great to replicate at the county level for the jail and sheriff's department and DA's office.
I agree. And also at the state level, I think, am I right, Leah, that we're the only 7 people in the whole state who are not like part of the police department who even have access to any sort of body cam footage?
You are correct, to my understanding.
So
Me and Mark.
Portland.
Portland's, yeah.
Portland is an interesting system, and I'm honestly not sure where it stands right now. Especially
the new one passed. So
the new one passed, and it's already, and it's the subject of a lawsuit. And Yeah, so Portland's going to be a little bit up in the air, I think, for a little while. So I'm just not sure, honestly, because I don't know if they're going to keep. Anyway, me, Mark, Vicky, Beatrice, and you, Seven.
So I bring that up just to add some emphasis to what Bernadette was saying about how this needs to change in the legislature and how we need to probably push for that, in my opinion.
And Michael, we've reviewed cases where the misconduct is more in the jail than it, I mean, Eugene takes them in and then something happens in the jail and the complaint is made and to the auditor's office, but there's nothing for them to investigate because it happened in the jail with the sheriff's deputy. And then, you know, it's kind of like it goes and then all of a sudden it just like there you hit this wall. And yeah, I think it would be helpful. I think they were talking about doing a review process at the U of O. I don't remember if they actually put it in place or not then.
They just proposed, the president just sent an email this week. They're going to create something new. Yeah, like that.
I will say it can be so it's enormously frustrating when we get calls from people who, and we're talking to them and this all sounds like things that we investigate and then we find out it's Lane County Sheriff's or Springfield Police Department or OSP or UOPD, and it yeah, we really don't like having to tell people that there's no corresponding agency for those agencies. So
Also connected to that, we've had cases where EPD has worked with UOPD, so we have UOPD people on the body cams, but then they don't have to share their information with us either. So I think a little bit more communication between the Lane County units, forces, I don't know, departments, could also be something that would be helpful for our county to have, to kind of build on what you were saying, Michael.
And as a reactionary body, which is what we are, I mean, the police commission is proactive and we're reactive. You know, departments, cities don't put CRBs in place until they think there's a need to. You know, it would be nice if they were proactive in looking at being reactive, in the sense that they think ahead to put something in to review what's going on with the police. But, you know, that it's just not in place. And, you know, there's costs involved and where do we want our money to go? I mean, you know, we want our money to go to cahoots, to go to mental health, to go to rehab, those sorts of things. But we also want to be able to support, you know, reviewing what police are doing. So I think this was just a good, you know, be able to show, you know, a snapshot of something that kind of doesn't fall through the cracks, but doesn't allow this process to address the concerns of a great many numbers of our citizens.
Yeah, I'll add my short 2 cents here that you know, I see this I see the role of this board as kind of a quilting point between the people of Eugene and the Eugene Police Department. At least that's what I hope it does, and that you know, that despite what I want or what I think, that this is a two-way street, that communication and you know, community is happening both ways, and that in this, you know, I was also kind of thinking, I mean, I guess what other people said, that there's just not enough here, and that I like to think that you don't change processes in the middle of processes, and that you change them after they're done. And you, like as Bernadette pointed out, you know, we're reactionary by nature, and that it would seem to me to be as difficult as it is to say, this is just one long exercise in sitting with ambivalence. This board is sometimes, but that if the charge, as I see it, one of the larger, like, hopeful charges of something like this is to build trust among the people of Eugene again, right, as a community, in supporting processes that are supposed to be civic and institutional in a time where that looks to be more difficult than ever to believe in a broader sense. I would just say that to underscore that, like, it doesn't seem like the right time to be intervening right now. for me.
Since this didn't really follow our thing, I don't really know when to close it up. Are there any last thoughts on this this discussion, this case?
I have nothing.
I do think that this conversation has been really good, and if anyone does watch it, I think that it will hopefully go some way to, even though I said it won't, maybe it will, because I think that we were all so reflective about how we feel about the process. So I appreciate people's honesty and openness.
I agree. I think that the reflection on the process is something that's hard to understand unless you've been in the process yourself, right? Any other final thoughts? Okay, Leah, would you like to do a quick auditor's report? And then we'll do some closing comments.
The quickest. Okay, I really want to thank you all. I really appreciate this group. I appreciate your frankness and your honesty and how you can have really tough conversations in a cordial way. And I think Mark and I might seem a little bit fawning sometimes when we give you these compliments, but I genuinely feel it. It's lovely to have a group that's really easy to work with, and I expect good conversations from, and I like giving you difficult things to talk about because I know I'll learn, and hopefully the community will as well. So thank you for your thoughts and your time. Vicki is back for a while at least, and she is amazing and wonderful and putting up with everything. And Beatrice is amazing and wonderful and did all the intakes when Vicki was out, because I did not have the capacity to help in that way. So I am really, really grateful to Vicki and Beatrice right now also, and Mark as well. Although, you know, he's my boss, so I don't get to be that grateful. But just kidding, sorry. An update on the community impact case, that is actually mostly done. Almost all of the investigations, like the investigative reports, are complete. There was one where there was a little supplemental information that I asked for, that's been completed. My hope is to get my adjudication recommendations to the chief by the end of next week. And then hopefully he can get his preliminary adjudication finished and we can get that case to you within the first couple of weeks of December. We are still working out logistics of making sure you are able to review the 600 plus hours of video if you want to. Bill likes that. Bernadette, I know won't. But
It's like looking at the faces as you said that. It's like Michael's eyes got big. I was like, oh.
Like you don't have.
Yeah, I'm old. I'm not sure I have that many years left in my life.
We will specifically include relevant ICV and body worn camera, like because we have specific allegations. We'll give you files like you typically get, where you have this. Like I think we have. I'm going to estimate like 7-ish allegation investigations. So you will get those files like you typically would. And then I think what we'll do is set up some kind of terminal so you have access to more video, because we need to give you access. And then if anyone wants to come and look at that, you can. I will, EPD has given a lot of resources to help us with this, and I really do appreciate that. They brought over another investigator and they redirected their quality assurance person to be watching all that 600 plus hour of video. And that was enormously helpful. We were able to catch things that weren't complained about to us that we wanted to look at anyway. So you'll get that soon. Thank you. I was going to talk about the ad hoc committee but I feel like we've already covered that tonight and I only have a few minutes. We will be reporting to council on Monday. Mark and I will be presenting the annual report for our office. Lindsay will be presenting the annual report for CRB. That's at the evening meeting, so that's on the webcast. If you guys are interested in watching, you're more than welcome to, but it's just our 2019 annual reports and we weren't able to get on their calendar before this because it's been a really busy year. Yeah, and then following that, I'll probably present our annual report to Police Commission in December or January, whenever they want me. We tend to present to the council first since that's who we report to. And then we go to Police Commission if they want to hear it also. So I think that's my quick report. I hope I'm not missing anything. You all are welcome to call me anytime if you have any questions or there's any cases or things that are piquing your interest.
One question, Leah. We have 2 weeks, correct, from the time we get the community impact case to talk about it, correct? So I think that that's something to note, that we need to be pretty timely when we get the email from Vicky saying that they're available. I know I sometimes leave it off, but I think this will be a different thing. So I'm going to encourage everyone to pick it up quickly and get going on it, because I don't think that 600 hours of video is possible in 2 weeks, but I bet the amount that you're giving us is going to be more than even what we had tonight. Yeah. So then are we still, do you think, on track to have our meeting on the second Tuesday of December?
I think it's safe to plan for that. You are to meet within 14 days of receiving the file. I'm also going to note you are to respond within 30 days of receiving the file. It doesn't need to be a super a lengthy response, and I can send you all a link to the part of the city code that describes what that response can contain. There's basically 3 ways you can respond to a community impact case. So I'll make sure you guys have that information, but yeah, I think it's safe to point towards that date, and I will check in with the chief and make sure that we can meet it on our end. Bernadette.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, because there's requirements that the public impact case be kind of decided a little differently, if you could send out the information about that so people can start thinking as they're reviewing it. And Carolyn and I can talk about how the process is going to go for review, because it's not going to be the same way that we're talking about, do we agree with the adjudication necessarily in the same way. So I think if we have some information about it ahead of time, people will be able to kind of start to think about, as they're reviewing the case, how the discussion will be handled a little differently. Please.
Yeah. Yes, I will send the ordinance language tonight. And I will say, in general, it is kind of the chief has done a preliminary adjudication. You can say if you agree with it, if you need more investigation, or I forget what the other option is. So it is a little bit different, but I'll send it to you tonight so you have that information.
I will point out that 600 hours is only 300 hours if you watch it at double speed.
There you go. And then they talk like chipmunks, so it's super fun.
I watch university town halls that way.
Excellent.
Those are
Really
a bunch
good.
of chipmunks, aren't they? Sorry.
Good pro tip there. Any other questions on the auditor report? Okay. Closing comments. I'll do an opt-out situation here. So Bernadette, do you have a closing comment?
No, I think it was, no, I think it was. Yes, I have a quick comment. I think it was a great discussion tonight. I think this discussion would have been so much better had we been in the same room. It would have flowed so well. And I think it would have been better give and take. I think sometimes I feel very constrained by the process of Zoom to be able to really engage in the way and get across what I'm intending to say, but having to be so careful about how I'm saying it, because people can't ask the questions and have the reactions in the same way. So I look forward to the day that these would be in person as opposed to online, because I just think as great as these discussions are, they can be even so much better. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernadette. Bill, do you have a closing comment?
Just want to thank everybody, and I do agree with Bernadette. I miss in-person meetings, and I'm on Zoom most of the day here at work, and it drives me crazy. But you don't get the same conversation level that you do when you're in person and sitting across from somebody. So thank you, everyone.
Michael, and then Jose.
So in education, we call this different learning styles. Because I was just commenting to my partner during the break that I actually find this format to be much more freeing to me. So for example, when Kyle and I were having a little back and forth, like I could never be that confrontational with someone from the police department in person. Like when we're in the same room, I get really nervous. But something about the internet allows me to be more confrontational.
I'd just like to submit my gratitude to everyone. I've never sat in a room with you or had the privilege of being able to, look you in the eye. So there's a kind of vulnerability about doing it this way that I think is new territory for me and other folks. And part of that is I'm kind of craving the ability to like feel like I have solid ground right now when I feel like I'm floating in this deluge of information that I can't tell is real or not real. And so I appreciate feeling grounded temporarily for however long that lasts. Thank you all.
Yeah, I appreciate this group too. My closing comment is it's only 8:02. We're only 2 minutes over. I'm really proud of you all. And I appreciate you sticking with me for my first step into being the chair. And next month will be even crazier because it's going to be community impact case. And I should say it'll be different, not crazy. That's not a word I try to use. And I apologize for using that because I try not to use it. Anyhow, that's a good way to end this with me. Anyway, okay. See you guys, everybody in.
Carolyn.
Oh, yeah, Kyle.
Yeah, hey, it's Kyle. I don't have my video on. I'm in a dark car right now, but I just wanted to make a quick comment that Michael, I appreciate the comments and the discussion, and you certainly didn't come across as confrontational. And I hope that as you become more comfortable with the process, that even once we're back in person, you're willing to ask the questions and have the discussion with us. So
I'll warn you if there's an officer that you shouldn't confront, Michael. Kyle, yeah, you can go at him.
Thanks, Bernadette.
Sure, Kyle.
All right, have a good night, everybody.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
It is adjourned. We are adjourned. Yeah.
Yeah.